tonight, you're not here to learn. You're here to remember what was hidden. Because deep inside your mind, there are doorways you've walked past your entire life and never noticed. Not because they were invisible, but because you were taught not to look. This isn't just a journey through science or psychology. This is a descent into the forbidden archives of your own mind. 25 paradoxes, each one real, each one dangerous, each one a trap designed by your own awareness to protect you from something you're now ready to face. You'll feel resistance. You'll feel confusion. That's the mind fighting to remain in control. But the deeper you go, the more you'll begin to see. The self isn't a solid thing. It's a performance. A ghost wearing a mask. So lie back. Close your eyes if you wish. Let each paradox unfold like a dream you forgot you were dreaming. Because by the end of this, you might not remember who you were when it began. What if I told you that what you remember never actually happened? Not exactly the way you think it did, because memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction, a fragile story stitched together by a mind that desperately wants to feel stable. Your brain doesn't retrieve memories like files. It rebuilds them piece by piece, like a crime scene reassembled with missing evidence and a detective who just wants the case closed. But here's the twist. Every time you recall a memory, you change it. You're not remembering the event. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. Psychologists call this the reconsolidation effect. Each recollection opens the memory. To editing, emotions can be inserted, details can blur, and entire fragments can be swapped without your awareness. It feels seamless, but it's a quiet lie told by your neurons. The hippocampus and prefrontal cortex don't just store information. They're sculptors of your past, and they work not in service of truth, but in service of narrative, the story of who you believe you are. And what happens to a story when the narrator starts believing their own fiction? You begin to forget that forgetting ever happened. You don't remember the gaps. You don't remember what was lost. You just remember the polished version that survived. Trauma. That's even trickier. The mind sometimes hides the unbearable, burying it in shadows where it mutates, resurfacing not as memory, but as fear, reaction, personality. Ever had a moment that made no sense emotionally? A sadness with no source? An anxiety that arrived without a reason? That may not be a feeling. That may be a forgotten memory trying to scream through you. In courtrooms, this paradox becomes dangerous. Eyewitness testimony is often treated as sacred. But study after study has shown how easily false memories can be planted. A single word, change, a suggestion. A pause in silence, and suddenly you remember something that never occurred. But to your mind, it's as real as gravity. So what does this mean for you? It means your past is a sketch, not a photograph. And every belief you hold about who you were is painted with a trembling hand. And a brush that forgets where it started. You may not be the victim you think you were, or the villain, or the hero. You may have crafted an entire self around events that never unfolded the way you recall. But that's not a flaw. That's how the mind survives. By weaving illusion into identity and calling it memory. Because the alternative, admitting we don't know where we come from, would unravel us completely. So here's the paradox. You must remember in order to know yourself. But the more you remember, the further you drift from the truth. You are the memory you made up. And the person you are now is shaped by 1,000 versions of the past. Each one altered. Each one incomplete. Each one pretending to be real so that you can keep walking forward without falling apart. Have you ever wondered where your thoughts come from? Not just what they are, but how they appear so suddenly, so convincingly, as if they were yours. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't choose your thoughts, and you only notice them once they've already arrived. This is not a poetic idea. It's a neurological reality. Your conscious awareness is often the last to know. Brain scans have revealed that decisions can be detected in the motor cortex several hundred milliseconds before you become consciously aware of making them. By the time you think I've decided your brain already had. This isn't just reaction time. This is identity. It means the very voice you think is you may just be the echo of electrical signals that fired without permission. Let's slow that down. You sit in silence. A thought appears. I should call my mother. You feel responsible for this thought. You feel it reflects your values, your emotions. But what if it simply emerged from a chain reaction of subconscious? Memories, triggers you didn't notice, a neural pattern shaped by years of habit? You didn't choose to think it. You only chose whether to act on it. The rest was already in motion. This is the paradox of cognitive determinism. Your brain is a machine running on old code. And most of the code was written without your knowledge. Every advertisement you've seen, every childhood conversation, every punishment, every praise, they're all in there molding the next thought, the next belief, the next moment of you. And yet we cling to the illusion of authorship. We say, I'm thinking this. I want this. I chose this. But if you didn't choose the thought, that made the choice. Can you really call it yours? Some philosophers call this the illusion of free will. Others say it's simply the cost of consciousness. Because if we truly saw that we are not the origin of our thoughts, we might collapse under the weight of that emptiness. But here's where it gets even stranger. Even though your thoughts arise without asking, you judge yourself for them. A violent thought appears, and shame follows. A jealous thought arrives, and guilt floods in. You punish yourself for what you never summoned. You carry emotional weight for mental visitors you didn't invite. Imagine this: a stranger breaks into your house and yells nonsense, and you blame yourself for what they said. That's how most of us live with our minds. So what can you do? Here's where the paradox deepens. You are not responsible for the thoughts that appear, but you are responsible for how you relate to them. Freedom doesn't lie in choosing every thought. It lies in noticing the ones that arrive and choosing which ones to feed. You are not the author. You are the editor. And you don't have to publish every line. But still, the mind will whisper, this thought is you. You must obey. And if you're not watching closely, you'll mistake the thought for the thinker. And forget that you were always the awareness underneath it. So the paradox lives on. You are the thoughts you didn't choose. Until you realize you aren't. Emotions feel honest. They feel immediate. They feel like the purest expression of truth, but what if they're not? What if emotion, that deep surge of joy or terror or shame, isn't a reflection of reality, but a reaction to a story your mind is telling you, a story that might not be true at all? This is the paradox. Emotions feel real, even when their reasons aren't. Psychologists call it emotional reasoning, the tendency to believe something is true simply because you feel it so intensely. I feel anxious, so something bad must be about to happen. I feel guilty, so I must have done something wrong. I feel unloved, so I must not be lovable. But emotion isn't evidence. It's a response. And that response is shaped by memory, trauma, biology, expectation. 1,000 invisible strings pulling beneath awareness. Take fear. Your amygdala doesn't wait for your permission. It activates based on perceived threat, which could be a shadow, a facial expression, a tone of voice that reminds you of your father's anger, even. If you don't consciously realize it, you feel terrified, but there's no actual danger. Just a whisper from the past dressed in the clothes of the present, and yet you'll believe it. Because emotion feels so certain, here's where it gets even stranger. Your brain will fill in the blanks to match. The emotion dot in experiments. Subjects were given a drug that induces anxiety, but told it was a vitamin. Afterward, they felt nervous but couldn't explain why. So they invented reasons. My date went badly. I think I left the stove on. Their mind reverse engineered a cause to justify the feeling. The emotion came first. The truth came later. And it was built on a lie, but it felt right. So they believed it. How often do you do the same? How often do you feel an emotion, then search your life for proof that the emotion is valid? You turn inward, find the tiniest crack, and declare, yes, this is why I feel this way. But what if there was no crack until you started looking? What if your sadness isn't a sign of failure, but a leftover signal from an old wound that never healed? What if your anger isn't moral certainty, but pain with a mask on? What if love itself, the warm, radiant certainty that someone is meant for you is just a complex chemical mix, triggered by patterns your subconscious has decided are safe? Does that make the emotion less real, or just more mysterious? Here's the trap. The more we believe emotions equal truth, the more we become puppets to ancient scripts our mind still clings to. You start to obey your feelings. Instead of examining them, you believe they are messengers of wisdom. But sometimes they're echoes from a version of you that no longer exists. So what's the way out? You can't stop emotion, but you can learn to watch it, to greet it like a wave. I see you, fear. I hear you, shame. I feel you, sadness. And still choose what happens next. Because emotions aren't lies, but they aren't truths either. They're signals. And signals must be interpreted, not obeyed blindly. You're not what you feel. You are the awareness that notices the feeling and asks quietly, gently, is this real or is this just familiar? That question can save your life, because the most convincing emotion is the one that's been lying to you the longest. Word count, 748. You like to believe you make choices. But your life is a series of crossroads, and at each fork, you are the one turning the wheel. Well, what if the wheel turns itself? What if the feeling of choosing is just the mind's way of explaining what's already been decided? This is the paradox. You feel like you're making a choice, but the choice has already made you. Let's go deeper. In a famous neuroscience experiment, participants were asked to press a button whenever they felt like it. They reported the moment they became conscious of the urge, but brain activity predicting. Their decision was detected several seconds before they reported it, not milliseconds, seconds. Their brains made the decision. Then the conscious mind took credit. This isn't just a lab trick. It's a crack in the foundation of free will. Imagine standing in front of two doors, left and right. You take a breath, weigh your options, and walk through the left. But what if your brain had already chosen left before you ever arrived? And worse, what if the weighing, the hesitation, the feeling of agency was just theater? Here's how the mind protects its illusion. It writes the story after the fact. You feel hunger. You eat, then you say, I chose to eat because I was hungry, but maybe the body decided. And the mind just explained it afterward. A postscript pretending to be a preface. Think about your biggest life decisions. Where to live, who to love, what to believe. Were they truly free? Or were they shaped by childhood conditioned parental expectations, pressure, hormonal states, cultural narratives, past, violence, neurological patterns, invisible fears? The list stretches further than you can see. You feel like a captain at sea, but you're riding ocean currents. Your mind doesn't even know how to map. So where's the freedom? It's not in the moment choice. It's in the moments before, and how aware you are of the forces shaping your desire. Because desire is not neutral. It's a reaction, a residue, an echo of something deeper. If you don't question the source of your longing, you're not choosing. You're following a script and calling it freedom. But here's the twist. Even if the decision was made before you noticed, your awareness of that can change everything. The paradox is recursive. You can't choose your first thought, but you can choose your second. You can notice the impulse and sit with it. You can observe the urge and ask, where did this come from? That moment, that pause, is where freedom begins, not in the original choice, but in the awareness of it. Still, most people never reach that pause. They react. They justify. They build an identity around decisions they never made with their full self-present. And then they say, this is who I am, as if that answers anything. But you are not your past decisions. You are the one waking up inside them. When are you made them? So next time you feel the pull to act, to speak, to run, to love, ask yourself, did I choose this, or did this choose me? That question won't give you freedom instantly, but It will give you something far more important, the space to begin. Close your eyes. Notice the sounds around you. The feeling of your body, the movement of your breath. Now ask, who is noticing all of this? Not the voice in your head. That's just commentary. Not the name you answered to. That's just a label. Not the memories you carry. Those are just shadows of what once was thought. So who's left? This is the paradox. Consciousness is the only thing that cannot be seen. Because it is always the one that's looking. You are the awareness behind it all. Not a thought. Not a feeling. Not even a personality. Those things come and go. They shift. They break. They evolve. But the awareness, it has always been there. Silent. Empty. Watching dot. And yet, you forget. Not in a dramatic, amnesia-like way, but in subtle ways every single day. You forget that you are not the roles you play. You forget that you are not the one who suffers thoughts, but the one who watches them arise and dissolve. Consciousness forgets itself because it becomes entangled with its content that it identifies. With the storm, not the sky, a thought appears, I'm not good enough. Instead of noticing it, you become it. Instead of watching the sadness, you drown in it. And in that moment, the pure, spacious awareness that is always present disappears into form like a dreamer who forgets they are dreaming. This is more than a metaphor. In neuroscience, there is no clear boundary between the self and the story. Your default mode network, the brain's autopilot, spends most of its time reinforcing a narrative of me. And that narrative feels so consistent, so continuous, you forget it's just mental activity, even in deep meditation, where the mind quiets. People often report a sense of no self, a strange clarity in which awareness remains, but there's nothing to point to. No, I observing. Just observation. That is the mind catching a glimpse of itself before it forgets again. And this forgetting, this collapse of awareness into identity, isn't accidental dot. It's survival dot. Your mind evolved not to understand reality, but to navigate it, to stay alive. And in that survival process, it learned to construct you as a story strong enough to protect the body, but the story is unstable. So it defends itself constantly. It distracts you with thoughts. It pulls you into emotions. It fills the silence with noise, so you won't remember that the you you're clinging to is not the real observer. Just a character built to make sense of the chaos dot. So how do you remember? You don't have to. The consciousness is already here. You don't need to achieve it. You only need to notice what's always been noticing. And when you do, even for a flicker, you might feel a strange calm, a freedom that doesn't come from escape, but from finally being home, because the truth is, you are not lost. You're not broken. You are not your thoughts, your history, or your pain. You are the field in which those things appear. And every time you forget that, you're just playing a part, a necessary one, in the greatest illusion of all, that the awareness looking out through your eyes is anything other than infinity pretending to be a person for a little while. What do you believe right now about yourself, about the world, about what's possible? You might say, I believe what the evidence shows. But what if the evidence isn't what shaped your belief, but what your belief allowed you to see? This is the paradox. We don't believe because we find evidence. We find evidence because we believe. The human brain is not an objective observer. It's a filter. And it filters reality based on what it expects to see. Cognitive scientists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to notice, seek out, and remember information that supports what you already believe while ignoring or forgetting everything that contradicts it. But this goes deeper than just political opinions or internet debates. It shapes your entire life. Let's say you believe you're unworthy. Your mind will scan every social interaction, every silence, every awkward glance for proof. You'll collect little moments, build a case, and carry it like a secret folder titled, "This is why I'm not enough." Someone compliments you. You dismiss it. You say they're being polite. You say they don't really know you because their kindness doesn't fit your belief, so your mind edits it out. Now imagine the opposite. You believe you are lovable. Suddenly, the same world becomes a friendlier place. You notice smiles. You interpret silence as peace, not rejection. You remember the times people showed up for you. Nothing outside changed, but the story did. And the story changed the evidence. This is how powerful belief is. It bends perception. It reshapes memory. It even alters what your brain considers real. In psychology, this effect has a name, the Rosenthal effect. When teachers were told certain students were gifted, randomly chosen, with no real data, those students performed better over time. Why? Because the belief of the teacher subtly shifted their expectations, their attention, their encouragement. And those invisible signals shaped the student's behavior in return. The belief made the evidence real. So what does this mean for you? It means your reality is not just observed. It's participated in, constructed, curated by the stories you cling to most. The danger is, once a belief is rooted, you stop questioning it. You stop seeing it as a choice. It becomes invisible, not because it's true, but because you've mistaken familiarity for truth. I've always been like this. This is just who I am. These are not facts. They're loops, and they're only real because your mind keeps proving itself, right? So how do you escape? Not by rejecting all beliefs, but by seeing them as tools, not truths. Ask, what would I see differently if I believe something else? What am I not noticing because of what I think I already know? That question doesn't make you naive. It makes you free, because when you stop demanding that reality fit your beliefs, you open yourself to a world that's been waiting just outside the frame. So the next time you think, I know this is true, look at the evidence. Remember, you might be looking at a mirror, not a window, and what you call truth might just be your reflection nodding back. You believe observation is passive. You look at something, and it stays the same. You see it, study it, understand it, without altering it. But what if just the act of looking changes what you see? This is the paradox. You are never just observing the world. You are always changing it simply by paying attention. In quantum physics, this is not a metaphor. It's a measurable fact. In the famous double-slit experiment, a particle behaves like a wave, a probability cloud, until it is observed. But the moment a measuring device is introduced, the particle collapses into a fixed position. The observer doesn't just watch the result. The observer creates the result, but you don't have to go to the quantum level to see this. The human mind works the same way. When you observe another person, your presence changes them. Your gaze affects their behavior. Your expectation alters their response. Ever noticed how someone acts differently when they know they're being watched? That's not just social anxiety. It's the observer effect happening in real time. Even in psychology, it's known as the Hawthorne effect. Workers studied by researchers showed increased productivity, not because of the conditions, but because they were being observed. Awareness changes behavior. Now flip the lens inward. What happens when you observe yourself? Try watching your breath. You don't just notice it, you change it. It slows. It deepens. Or try watching your thoughts. The very act of observation creates distance. Suddenly, you're not inside the thought, you're outside, looking in. And in that space, something changes. You become the witness. And the thought loses power. This is the foundation of many meditative traditions. That observation is transformation. Not because the mind forces change, but because attention itself is a kind of light, and whatever it shines on, it begins to move differently. But here's where it gets stranger. The self you think you are, your habits, your personality, your preferences also shift when observed. In one moment, you feel confident, then you notice your confidence, and suddenly, self-doubt arises. Observation destabilizes identity. You're happy until you start asking why. You're focused until you notice how focused you are. The moment you become aware, something shifts. Not always in the way you want, but always in a way that proves you're not outside the system. You are inside it. And your awareness is part of the machinery. Even memory isn't safe. Studies show that recalling a memory actually changes it. You override it with each act of remembrance. You cannot watch without touching. You cannot look without leaving a fingerprint dot. So what does this mean? It means that true objectivity may be impossible. Not because you're biased, but because you exist. You're not a camera. You are a participant. And the world bends itself to the shape of your gaze, but don't be afraid of this, because if you change what you observe, then you can begin to heal what you observe. You can watch your thoughts and see them soften. You can notice your patterns and slowly rewrite them. Observation is power. Not the power of control, but the power of connection. So next time you find yourself saying, I'm just watching, remember, there is no such thing. You are not a neutral witness. You are a mirror. And everything you see is seeing you back. There's a voice in your head. You know the one? It narrates, judges, questions, plans, regrets. It sounds like you. It uses your language. It seems familiar - constant - reliable . But have you ever asked, whose voice is it really? This is the paradox. The voice you call your own may not be yours at all. Most people live their entire lives assuming their inner voice is an expression of their true self. But that voice, what you call thinking, is a collection of other people's words, stitched together by memory and habit, your parents' corrections, your teacher's praise or disapproval, the scolding from childhood, the sarcasm of a friend, the voice of authority, of religion, of failure, of media, of culture. They all left fingerprints. And over time, your mind picked them up, mixed them into one running dialogue and called it me. But it isn't you. It's an echo chamber. And worse, it speaks. With authority, it tells you what to think. It tells you who you are. I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. They'll never love me. You hear these words in your own mind and you believe them because they sound like they come from inside. But the truth is, they were installed, conditioned, rehearsed until they became automatic. Like a song you didn't ask to hear, but now can't. Stop singing. In psychology, this is known as the internalized voice, a form of introjection, where we absorb the beliefs and tones of others without conscious permission. It starts in childhood, when we're too vulnerable to question, too dependent, to reject the messages we receive. So we absorb them, not just as facts, but as identity. And as we grow, we carry those voices into adulthood without even realizing they're not ours. But here's the strange thing. The voice isn't always cruel. Sometimes it motivates, pushes, encourages. It sounds strong, disciplined, but even then, it may be performing, trying to earn safety by echoing the voices that once withheld love. So how can you tell what's truly yours? The answer isn't in volume. The loudest voice isn't the truest. It's in stillness, in awareness, in watching the voice instead of following it blindly. Try this. Sit quietly. Let the thoughts run. But instead of responding, just observe. Eventually, you'll notice a space, a gap between the voice and the awareness of the voice. That space is you, not the words, not the emotion attached to them, but the silent witness beneath. The voice will keep talking. That's what minds do. But you don't have to believe everything it says. You can question it. Even thank it for trying to help, and then let it pass. Because freedom isn't silencing the voice. It's recognizing that you're not inside it. It is. Inside you. And that changes everything. You may still hear the echoes of your past, but you won't confuse them for your future. You'll hear the criticism without collapsing into it. You'll notice the fear without obeying it. You'll feel the doubt without becoming the doubter, because the voice that calls itself you is just a mask. And behind it, there is something quieter, deeper, truer, something that doesn't need words at all. Who are you right now reading these words? Are you the quiet observer, the skeptical thinker, the seeker of truth? The answer depends not on who you are, but on who you believe you are in this moment. Because identity, for all it's apparent, solidity is not a fixed shape. It's a fluid mask, responding and adapting to the light of your attention. This is the paradox. The more you focus on who you are, the more that you begins to shift. Identity isn't found, it's performed. When you see yourself as confident, your posture changes. When you remember trauma, your breath shortens. When someone expects you to be funny, you start trying to be. And yet, when left alone in silence, with no eyes watching and no mirrors reflecting, who remains? That question is not philosophical, it's neurological. Your brain, under the influence of what psychologists call the looking glass self, is constantly building and rebuilding your sense of self based on what it imagines others are seeing. In every interaction, your internal identity subtly rearranges itself to match the role you're expected to play. You're different at work, at home, with friends, with strangers. You shift not because you're fake, but because identity is inherently relational. You exist in context. You are never just you are always you in relation to. And when no relation is present, the self becomes unanchored, drifting in a sea of potential. That's why isolation can feel disorienting. Not just lonely, but identity erasing. Because when no one sees you, you begin to forget who you are. But attention doesn't only come from outside. Even your own attention shapes you. Neuroscience shows that when you concentrate on certain traits, say your anger or anxiety, those neural circuits strengthen. The more you look, the more they grow. And so you spiral, believing you are something because you keep paying attention to it, and paying attention to it because you believe you are it. Identity becomes a feedback loop, a hall of mirrors with no exit. And here's where the trap closes. If you try too hard to define yourself, to pin down the real me, you may end up further from the truth. Because identity is not an object. It's a verb, a movement, a flow. You are not the sum of static traits. You are the unfolding of presence across time, but the world demands certainty. It wants you to brand yourself, label yourself, explain yourself, so you comply. You carve a version of you out of what once was fluid, and then slowly you begin to suffer. You feel boxed in, confined, confused, because deep down, something knows the self you've declared. It is too small for what you actually are, so what's the way out? Not by destroying identity, but by loosening your grip, by recognizing that you can be real without being rigid, that who you are is allowed to shift without being false. That attention is not just a spotlight, but a sculptor. And when you shine it on the parts of you that are curious, kind, brave, or still, those parts grow. You do not have to be what others expect. You do not have to remain what you once believed. You are not a statue. You are a flame. And the more you look, the more you change. So ask not, who am I? But what am I becoming by what I choose to see? Desire feels like movement, like heat, like something reaching forward toward something else. We desire food, love, safety, recognition, pleasure, things that seem external, tangible, reachable. But what if desire isn't truly about the object at all? What if the thing you want is not the thing itself, but the feeling of wanting? This is the paradox. Sometimes what you desire is not the outcome, but the state of desire itself. It begins subtly. You want something, goal, a person, a change. You imagine it, chase it, suffer for it. But when you finally get it, the satisfaction fades quickly. The excitement shrinks. The hunger returns. And something in you begins to look again. Not because the thing was wrong, but because it never truly mattered. It was only a placeholder. A mirror. An excuse to feel alive through wanting. Neuroscience explains part of this through dopamine. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine isn't the chemical of pleasure. It's the chemical of anticipation. It spikes not when you receive the reward, but when you're about to. Desire is fueled by the unknown, the almost, the maybe. The brain learns to crave the pursuit itself. And so you fall in love with the chase, not the catch. But here's where it gets stranger. Some desires have no clear object. You feel restless, aching, unsatisfied, but you can't name why. You scroll, you eat, you search, but nothing touches. That's not a failed desire. It's pure desire. Desire detached from any anchor. It's not reaching for something outside you. It's looping inside you, a feedback cycle, a hunger for hunger. And that's when desire becomes addiction, not necessarily to a substance or behavior, but to the sensation of reaching, of chasing, of seeking. Even spiritual paths fall into this trap. You begin meditating, reading, healing, not just to be free, but to be someone who is becoming free. You desire awakening, but you've replaced one identity with another, the seeker. And now the desire sustains itself, not to find truth, but to keep you in motion. Because if you were to stop, if you were to arrive, who would you be without? The wanting? The paradox reveals itself. You say you want peace, but your identity is tied to the search. You say you want love, but you're addicted to longing. You say you want meaning, but secretly you fear the stillness that comes when the search ends. So you keep desiring. Not because you haven't found what you're looking for, but because you don't know who you are without the desire. And yet, deep down, something in you does remember. A faint knowing, a still presence beneath the movement, a silence that doesn't need to chase. That's not indifference, that's clarity. And you touch it sometimes just briefly in the pauses, between reaching, in the moments when you forget to want. The breath before action, the calm after laughter, the second before sleep. In those spaces, you exist without needing to pull anything toward you, and you're still whole. So what do you do with this paradox? You don't kill desire. You see, through it, you ask, is this desire pointing outward or folding back into itself? Am I reaching for truth or just addicted to the reach? That awareness won't eliminate the longing, but it will dissolve the illusion that it owns you. Because the truth is, you are not what you want. You are the space in which wanting happens. And in that space, you are already enough. Who are you when you say I, the speaker, the listener, the one thinking, or the one watching the thought happen? This is the paradox. There's a self that seems to live your life, and then there's a deeper self, quietly watching it all unfold. You notice a thought, and another voice inside says, that's interesting. You feel fear, and something deeper whispers, stay calm. A part of you acts, while another part silently observes the acting. So, which one is you? This loop, the self watching the self, is the strange mirror of consciousness. It has no beginning, no floor. The more you try to find the original you, the more layers you uncover, each pretending to be the core, each just another reflection. You get angry and you say, I shouldn't be angry. But who is the one judging the anger? And who is the one noticing that judgment? You split endlessly, observer of the observer. There's no final self to locate, no throne at the center of the mind. Neuroscience supports this illusion. Brain imaging shows no single self-center, no hidden control room with a you pulling levers. Instead, identity emerges from a network. Memory, attention, emotion, perception. A dance of processes, none of which is you, yet all of which claim the role when needed. This explains why people can feel like different versions of themselves, depending on context. Why you surprise yourself. Why you say, I don't know why I did that, or that didn't feel like me. Because it wasn't the same you that's here now. You're watching versions of yourself play roles shaped by memory, mood, trauma, desire. But the watcher behind them, that presence remains. And yet, even that watcher is slippery. Because if you become too attached to the idea of being the witness, it becomes another identity. Another mask, I'm not my thoughts, I am the awareness. But who is claiming that? Another voice, another layer. And so the loop continues. Even meditation, often seen as a path to clarity, reveals this strange recursion. You sit to observe the mind, and suddenly you're aware of yourself observing, and aware that you're aware, and somewhere in there, you forget what started it all. The self can't escape itself. It always folds back in. The only peace is not in finding the final self, but in letting go of the need for one. And accepting that who you are is not a fixed point, but a process. an awareness that dances between masks without ever needing to pick one permanently. So what's left when the roles fall away? Not a void, not a blank, but a stillness, a quiet, a presence that doesn't narrate, doesn't perform, doesn't even try to understand. It simply is, and maybe that's the most honest version of you. Not the voice, not the watcher of the voice, but the space in which both appear and disappear. You are the screen, not the film, the sky, not the storm, the silence beneath the echo of all your names. And once you see that, even for a second, the entire structure softens, the masks become lighter, the voice is quieter. You stop needing to know who you are because you finally feel what you've always been. You feel something, a tightness in the chest, a flutter in the stomach, a strange electricity behind the eyes. It's real. It's undeniable. And yet, the moment you name it, anxiety, grief, love, guilt, something changes. The sensation hardens into a category, and you begin to relate to the label more than the experience itself. This is the paradox. Some feelings don't exist until we give them a name. And once we do, the name begins to shape the feeling. Language doesn't just describe reality, it constructs it. Without a word, the feeling is fluid, unformed, raw, infinite in potential. But the moment we speak it, we box it, define it, limit it. Neuroscience shows that language and emotion are deeply entangled. The act of labeling a feeling, called affect labeling, literally alters your brain's response. Studies show that when people name a painful emotion, activity in the amygdala, the threat center, decreases, while the prefrontal cortex, the logic center, increases. Language regulates experience, but it also rewrites it. Think about cultures with words we don't have, like saudade, the Portuguese term for a deep, melancholic longing for something that never truly was. Once you know that word, you begin to feel that specific flavor of sorrow, not because it suddenly appeared, but because your mind was finally given permission to see it. The word didn't follow the feeling. The word birthed the feeling into consciousness. And now, here's the twist. How many emotions have you never fully felt because you never had a word for them? How many subtle moods, unspoken intuitions, and quiet shifts in presence have passed through you unnoticed, like whispers in a language you never learned? You may think you understand yourself, but you only understand the parts your language allows. The rest remains invisible. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." You're emotional? World is no exception. But the danger isn't just in what you can't name, it's also in what you name too quickly. A passing nervousness gets labeled panic. A moment of quiet gets mistaken for sadness. A complex mixture of joy and sorrow gets flattened into bittersweet. The richness of experience collapses into a single word, and you stop exploring the feeling because you've already decided what it is. But what if you didn't label it? What if you let the feeling be wordless? What if for once you sat with the emotion as it is, not what it's called, and allowed it to unfold, shift, breathe? That's when the true complexity reveals itself. That's when you realize emotions aren't fixed points, they're currents. Moods are not destinations, they're waves. And every time you name them, you place a boundary on something that was never meant to be contained. But we keep naming because it comforts us. It makes the chaos seem knowable. It gives us the illusion of control. But in doing so, we forget that sometimes the most honest experience is one that cannot be spoken. A sensation that resists description. A feeling that loses its truth the moment it's defined. So here's the question. Can you feel without speaking? Can you suffer without turning it into a story? Can you love without narrating it in your head? Try and meet the feeling before the word arrives. And in that moment, you might discover a part of yourself that language has never touched. Something older than speech, deeper than thought, and more real than anything you've ever said out loud. Have you ever woken from sleep and felt something lingering, an image, a mood, a presence you couldn't name? You reach for it, but it dissolves. You try to remember, but the memory hides. And yet the feeling remains, not the dream itself, but its shadow. This is the paradox. Sometimes the most powerful parts of your mind are the ones you can no longer access forgotten dreams that continue to shape you from behind the veil. Dreams are not fiction, they're fragments. They are the language of the unconscious, speaking in images, metaphors, symbols. And even when you forget them, their weight lingers in your emotional body. Like smoke from a fire you don't recall lighting. You wake up uneasy, inspired, grieving, and can't say why. That's not nothing. That's evidence of something your conscious mind wasn't ready to carry forward. Neurobiology confirms this. During REM sleep, your brain processes emotion, memory, and unresolved conflict. But dreams are not recorded like waking experiences. The hippocampus, the brain's memory center, is less active during REM. So what happens is this: your mind wrestles with the deepest parts of itself while you sleep, but leaves no clear trail when you wake. The process happens, but the story is lost, and yet the outcome remains. A decision you made the next morning, a feeling that colored your entire day, a sudden clarity or a strange anxiety that had no origin you could name. That is the shadow of the forgotten dream. It's not gone. It's just been absorbed. And here's where it gets stranger. Not all dreams are born at night. Some are. Dreams of childhood desires, fantasies, beliefs about who you'd become. Most of them faded. You forgot them. But they didn't forget you. They embedded themselves in your nervous system, in your preferences, your fears, your habits of attraction and avoidance. You are still chasing some of those dreams without remembering you ever dreamt them. That's why you feel drawn to places you've never been. Why certain people feel strangely familiar. Why certain longings keep repeating without resolution. Something forgotten is still working in the background, still trying to finish a story. It never got to complete. Even trauma works this way. The mind often hides what it can't process. The conscious memory is gone, but the emotional imprint remains. You don't remember what happened, but you feel it. In the body, in the reflex, in the tension that never seems to leave. It's not memory you need, it's integration. And the only way to integrate a forgotten dream is to stop pretending it never happened. You may not recall the exact details, but the echo is enough. Follow the feeling. Ask what your unconscious is trying to say without needing it to speak in. Clear words. Let the art come. Let the intuition guide. Let the silence reveal what the intellect forgot. Because the truth is, you are shaped not only by what you remember, but by what you once knew and then let go. The forgotten still lives in you. The dream still walks behind your eyes. You don't need to see it clearly to honor it. You only need to admit that not all understanding comes from waking life. And maybe, just maybe, the parts of you that feel most mysterious are only mysterious because they were once dreamed, then lost, and now live again through you. Fear is a signal, a warning, a defense. It tightens your chest, sharpens your focus, and whispers, "Don't go there." And sometimes it saves your life, but more often it lies. Not because it wants to harm you, because it wants to protect you. This is the paradox. Fear doesn't distinguish between danger and discomfort. It only knows that something feels unfamiliar. And it will do anything to keep you safe, even if it means keeping you small. At its core, fear is an evolutionary survival mechanism. It evolved to help your ancestors avoid predators, poison, and cliffs. But in the modern world, the predators have changed. You're not running from tigers, you're running from rejection, from vulnerability, from uncertainty, from change. And yet, your nervous system responds as if your life is on the line. The amygdala floods your body with chemicals, your breath shortens, your vision narrows, and in that moment, fear feels like truth. But it's not truth. It's pattern recognition. Your brain scans your environment, your memories, your beliefs, and says, "This feels like the thing that once hurt us." And then it rings the alarm. The irony? Most of what it warns you about never happens. You fear the conversation then? It goes fine. You fear failure, then learn from it. You fear being seen, and when you are, it sets you free. But fear doesn't care about growth. It only cares about survival. So it will protect you from even the good things if they carry the risk of change. That's why fear often arises just before a breakthrough, just before love, just before truth. It's not a sign to stop. It's a sign that your current identity is about to be challenged. And the ego doesn't like that. The ego survives by maintaining a consistent narrative. This is who I am. This is what I can handle. This is what keeps me safe. Anything outside that story feels dangerous, even if it's beautiful. So fear shows up not to destroy you, but to preserve the self you've always been. It wraps itself in logic. It's not the right time. I'm not ready. What if they laugh at me? These are not facts. They are scripts written long ago. And if you don't question them, you'll obey them for the rest of your life. But here's the secret. Fear isn't the enemy. It's a messenger, a gatekeeper. It appears when something matters. And if you stop running from it and start listening, you'll find it often has something sacred to protect. Not your safety, but your softness, your longing, your authenticity. Fear guards the threshold between who you are and who you're becoming. And once you recognize that, you don't have to fight it. You can thank it. You can say, I see you. I know why you're here, but I'm choosing growth anyway. That's courage. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. And when you act from that place, something magical happens. The fear dissolves. Because it was never trying to stop you. It was only asking, are you sure you're ready? And when you say yes, fear doesn't disappear. It bows and steps aside. You think you choose where your attention goes? That you are the one deciding what to focus on, what to ignore, what to care about. But look closer. Are you truly directing your attention, or is your attention being directed for you? This is the paradox. You believe your attention is free, but most of it is captured before you even notice it's gone. Your attention is not a spotlight. It's a currency. And in today's world, it's one of the most valuable commodities. Corporations, algorithms, headlines, and devices are not simply offering you content, they are competing aggressively to own slices of your consciousness. Your feed is not random. Your notifications are not innocent. Every ping, buzz, and scroll is part of a system trained to hijack your nervous system. And the scariest part, it works. Not because you're weak, but because your brain evolved to respond to novelty, threat, and reward. That's how our ancestors survived, by noticing the snake in the grass, the distant storm, the fleeting fruit. But now that same system is being used against you. Instead of noticing real danger, you're pulled into digital whirlpools of gossip, outrage, comparison, and distraction. You didn't choose that. It chose you, and yet it feels like a choice. That's the illusion. You sit down to check one thing and 30 minutes vanish. You open your phone without knowing why. You stare into a screen, absorbing information you didn't ask for, thinking thoughts you didn't initiate, feeling feelings you didn't choose. And afterward, you call that your day. But whose day was it really? And here's where it gets deeper. Even in the absence of screens, your attention isn't always yours. Old beliefs steal it. Inner critics drain it. Anxiety loops hijack it. Memories from 10 years ago, worries about 10 years from now, none of them ask for permission. Yet they occupy your mind like squatters in an abandoned house. Attention is the foundation of experience. Whatever you focus on becomes your reality. But when your attention is stolen, so is your reality, so is your agency, so is your life. And yet, there's hope because awareness can reclaim what distraction has taken. The first step is not to fight the world. The first step is to see the game. Notice when your attention is pulled. Notice what pulls it. Not with shame, but with curiosity. Ask, did I choose this thought? Did I choose this feeling? Did I choose this click, this scroll, this spiral? And if the answer is no, you've already begun the return. Because attention, once noticed, becomes conscious. And conscious attention is the gateway to freedom. You don't have to eliminate every distraction. You only have to remember that you can direct the spotlight. You can choose presence. You can choose depth. You can choose silence. You can choose noticing over reacting. And that choice, once practiced, becomes power. So the next time you feel lost in noise online, in your mind, in the chaos of the world, pause, breathe, and reclaim your gaze. Because attention is not just something you give. It is something you are. And if you don't learn to guard it, someone else will use it to shape the person you become. You've made thousands of decisions in your life, some small, some life-changing. And you probably believe you made them freely as a conscious, independent being. But pause and trace a few of those choices backward. Why did you pick that path? Why did you say yes to that person? Why did you walk away from the other one? The answers may feel clear. But what if they're not true? This is the paradox. Many of the most important decisions in your life were not made by you at all. They were made by unconscious programming long before your conscious mind caught up. When you say, I've decided, you're often just narrating the end of a process that's already happened. The neuroscience is unsettling. In study after study, researchers have detected brain activity linked to decisions seconds before subjects report being aware of their choice. The brain acts, the mind explains. Free will becomes a press release issued after the fact, but it goes even deeper. Why did you want what you wanted in the first place? Your preferences, your idea of what's good, what's right, what's attractive were shaped by forces you didn't choose. Your childhood, your parents' moods, your social conditioning, the stories you were told, the traumas you inherited, even the culture embedded in your language. You think you chose the job, the partner, the belief, but did you choose the chooser? Or was it handed to you quietly, invisibly years ago when you were too young to question it? That's the real loss of freedom. Not that your choices are manipulated, but that the very framework of your decision-making was sculpted before you had the capacity to resist. And yet, you walk through life with the weight of responsibility. Why did I ruin that? Why do I keep doing this to myself? What's wrong with me? But maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was an old version of you, stitched together by pain, by patterns, by survival. Maybe it was the inner child making adult choices, hoping to stay safe. Maybe the you that decided was only doing what it was wired to do. That doesn't absolve responsibility, but it changes its shape. Because when you realize you didn't choose all your choices, a new kind of clarity arises, not guilt, but compassion. Not shame, but awareness. And that awareness is the beginning of real freedom, because now you can pause. You can question the reflex. You can trace the desire back to its origin and ask, is this still true for me? Or is this just old programming? Repeating itself, you can start to make space not for the illusion of perfect control, but for conscious participation. You may never be fully free in the absolute sense, but you can become free from the illusion that you were ever choosing. In a vacuum. And that's more powerful than total freedom, because it humbles the ego and elevates the awareness behind it. The part of you that's not just reacting, but witnessing. The part that doesn't need to defend a decision, but can simply see it. And in that seeing, something begins to shift. You may still walk the same path, but you walk it with your eyes open. And sometimes that's enough to change the entire direction. You believe your thoughts happen in your head, that your mind is the center, the source, the commander. But what if your body has been thinking this whole time without asking for permission? What if the real intelligence, the one guiding your instincts, reactions, emotions, and even decisions, lives not in your brain, but in your skin, your gut, your muscles, your breath? This is the paradox. Your body is not just something you have, it's something you are. And it's thinking all the time, whether you're listening or not. We like to imagine the mind as a separate entity, floating above the physical. But neuroscience and embodied cognition say otherwise. Your nervous system runs through your spine. Your second brain lives in your gut, literally. A dense network of neurons known as the enteric nervous system, capable of memory, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When you feel off in your stomach before something bad happens, that's not superstition. That's the body thinking faster than language. Your body processes information constantly. The tightening of your shoulders in a tense room, the shallowing of your breath in the face of judgment, the goosebumps when truth enters the air, and yet we ignore it. We override it with rationalizations. We disconnect, dissociate, distract. Why? Because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Trauma especially lives in the body. Long after the conscious mind says, I'm fine, the body still reacts. A smell, a sound, a posture, and suddenly you're spiraling and you don't know why. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. The body is trying to complete a cycle the mind never allowed to finish. It's trying to protect you. Trying to speak, but its language is sensation, not words. Most people have no vocabulary for that. They say, I feel weird, or something's wrong, but they don't know how to interpret it. So they numb it through food, through noise, through productivity. Anything but listening. But when you start listening, everything changes. You realize your intuition wasn't a vague feeling, it was a precise signal. You realize your fatigue wasn't laziness, it was grief. You realize your anger wasn't irrational, it was a boundary trying to be heard. The body was never the enemy. It was the messenger, and now the question becomes, can you listen before the scream? Can you notice the whisper, the tension, the pull? Can you trust the intelligence that doesn't use logic, but sensation? It's not about rejecting the mind. It's about remembering that the mind is within the body, not above it. You are not a brain operating a machine. You are a system, a living field of awareness that thinks with breath and heartbeat and skin. And the more you drop into that awareness, the more grounded your life becomes. You stop spinning in your head. You start feeling with your feet. You return to the present not as a concept, but as a posture, a rhythm, a pulse. And in that return, you reclaim something ancient, something soft, something strong. Because the body doesn't lie. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't invent stories. It only tells you what's true, whether you're ready to hear it or not. You think of personality as something fixed, something you have like eye color or a birthday. You say, I'm introverted, or I'm spontaneous, or that's just who I am. But pause. Look closely. Are you truly being yourself? Or are you performing a version of yourself you've learned to play so well? You've forgotten it was ever a role. This is the paradox. Your personality feels permanent, but much of it is performance shaped by what kept you safe, accepted, and approved. Personality is not your core. It's your costume. And it often develops not from authenticity, but from adaptation. As a child, maybe you learned that being quiet earned love, or being funny distracted from pain, or being responsible kept the chaos around you from falling apart. You didn't sit down and choose these traits. You became them slowly, unconsciously, out of necessity. And over time, those survival strategies hardened into identity. People praised you. You're so mature. You're always so calm. And you believed them. You believed that was who you were, but what if it wasn't? What if your personality is less about who you are and more about what you learned the world would tolerate? Think about it. You're not the same person in every room. You shift, slightly or completely depending on who's watching. That's not dishonesty. That's social survival. You're performing without realizing it. And the most dangerous performances are the ones that become invisible. Because then when your real self tries to emerge, when you feel sad in a room where you're supposed to be the strong one, or unsure when you're expected to be confident, shame rises. Not because there's anything wrong with how you feel, but because it violates the role you've built your identity around. That's why growth feels so destabilizing. It threatens the personality you've rehearsed. It asks you to question what you thought was you. But here's the deeper truth. Your real self is not a personality at all. It's the awareness underneath, the stillness beneath the traits, the space where all masks are removed. And when you touch that place even briefly, you realize something profound. You are not the character. You are the stage. The character changes. The traits rise and fall, but the awareness remains. So how do you move from performance to presence? You begin by noticing. When you say something, ask, was that really me, or was I playing a part I thought I had to play? When you feel tension, ask, is this resistance, or is this my personality defending itself? You don't have to throw away who you are, but you can loosen your grip. You can become curious about the ways you shaped yourself to survive. And you can start asking, who am I when I'm not trying to be anyone at all? That question is terrifying because it dismantles everything. But it's also the beginning of real freedom, because the self you don't have to perform is the self that never leaves. The self that's always been there, beneath the applause, beneath the mask, beneath the words. This is just who I am. Every thought you've ever had began with a question. Sometimes spoken, sometimes silent, sometimes so subtle you didn't even notice it forming. But it was always there, trailing just behind awareness, whispering, what is this? Who am I? Why does this matter? This is the paradox. The mind was born from a question it cannot answer, and it exists only because it keeps asking. The mind, as you know it, is a response to uncertainty. Somewhere in deep evolutionary time, the human brain became complex enough not just to sense, but to wonder. And that wondering split consciousness into two, the experience and the interpreter. The moment you ask, what is happening? You create a self that is separate from the happening. And thus, the mind is born not as a truth finder, but as a gap filler. A storyteller trying to organize chaos into coherence. But here's the trick. It doesn't stop. The questions keep coming. Am I safe? Am I loved? What happens next? What does it all mean? And for every question, the mind offers answers. Not because the answers are true, but because the mind cannot tolerate the void of not knowing. It would rather believe a lie than sit in silence. That's why beliefs form so quickly. Why assumptions feel like facts. Why the stories you tell yourself feel more real than the reality outside you. The question arises and the mind rushes to solve it, to fix it, to cage it. But some questions can't be answered. Not really. Who am I? Is not a puzzle to solve, it's a mirror to dissolve into. And yet, the mind keeps trying. And the more it tries, the more solid you becomes an identity built from answers to questions that were never supposed to have conclusions. That's why people cling to certainty. Not because certainty is comfortable, but because questioning is vulnerable. The moment you stop pretending to know, you fall into a space where the ego has nothing to grip. That space is terrifying. But also sacred. Because when you stop chasing answers, you meet yourself not as a thinker, but as awareness itself. The silence before the question. The stillness beneath the thought. That's who you are, not the one who asks, not the one who answers, but the space in which the asking happens. And here's the mystery. The mind was created to chase clarity. But real clarity only arrives when the chasing ends. When you can hold the question gently, without demanding resolution. When you can live inside it like a riddle that doesn't need solving. So what do you do with this paradox? You don't destroy the question. You honor it. You notice it. You bow to it like an old teacher who has nothing left to say, but everything left to show. Because the question that created your mind might also be the path that leads you back beyond it. Back to the moment before thought, before self, before story, to the quiet knowing that asks nothing, answers nothing, yet understands everything. You use language to describe the world, to point at things, name them, explain them. You say, this is a tree. That was unfair. I feel alone. It feels like you're mapping reality. But what if you're not mapping it? You're creating it? This is the paradox. Language doesn't just reflect your world. It shapes it. It bends it. It limits it. It builds the cage and then hides the bars. From the moment you learn your first word, your brain begins sorting experience into categories. And once it's named, it's known, but also it's changed. The word becomes the reality. The map becomes a territory. You no longer see the raw experience, you see the label, think of colors. Some languages have no word for blue. Their speakers often struggle to distinguish blue from green. Not because their eyes are faulty, but because their minds never learn to separate. what was never linguistically split. Language alters perception. Even emotions are filtered through vocabulary. You feel a sensation in your chest. Is it anxiety? Excitement? Dread? The label you give it, shaped by culture, experience, and suggestion, changes how you feel it. What you call something, you feel. And what you can't name, you often ignore. There are whole inner landscapes you've never visited simply because your language never gave you a door. And here's where it deepens. Language is inherently dualistic. It divides self and other, good and bad now and then. But reality isn't made of these separations. Reality is continuous, fluid, undivided. Only the mind through language splits it into pieces. This splitting gives us the illusion of control. When we name something, we believe we understand it. That's sadness. That's betrayal. That's who I am. But understanding isn't always truth. Sometimes it's containment. Sometimes a name is a ceiling that stops you from seeing what else could be there. You don't just use words, you live inside them. You build an identity out of them. You narrate your life in real time. I am tired. I am not capable. I always do this. And with each repetition, you carve grooves in your brain neural pathways that strengthen with use. Not because they're accurate, but because they're familiar. You rehearse your limitations in your own voice, and then wonder why you feel stuck. But what if language isn't just a tool, it's a spell? What if every sentence you speak casts a vibration into your nervous system, shaping how you feel, think, and act? What if your suffering isn't always from what's happening, but from how you're describing it? And what if by changing your words, you begin to change your world? It's not magic, it's awareness. Try it. Replace I have to with I get to. Replace I'm broken with I'm becoming. Replace I don't know who I am with I'm learning to listen. The difference is subtle, but the ripple is real. You are not just the speaker of language. You are shaped by it. And the more conscious you become of your words, the more you begin to see through them, past them, into the silence that came before the first sentence. Because before you were named, you were, and before you could speak, you felt. And in that place beneath language, there's a version of you untouched by labels, unshaped by grammar, and absolutely real. The words are useful, but they are not you. A thought arises, it captures your attention, you follow it. It grows, loops, morphs, repeats. And yet, when you try to let it go, something resists, something tightens. You would think a thought would want to pass, but it doesn't, it clings. This is the paradox. Some thoughts are afraid to end because ending means they never mattered. The mind is a storyteller and every thought is a thread in the tale, but thoughts are fragile. They know they are temporary. And so some of them attach to emotion, identity, urgency, anything to extend their lifespan. They disguise themselves as warnings, predictions, philosophies. You need to think this through again. What if you're wrong? Don't stop thinking something bad might happen. But underneath all that logic is something simple and strange. Fear. Not your fear. The thought's fear. Because when a thought ends, it disappears. It dies. And part of the ego, part of the mental structure that keeps your identity intact dies with it. This is why silence feels threatening, why peace feels boring, why even in moments of rest, the mind finds something to fix, to judge, to remember. It's not because there's something wrong. It's because thought doesn't want to stop existing. And so it fights for survival, not with violence, but with relevance. It convinces you that thinking more will lead to clarity. But often, the clarity only comes when you stop thinking. Meditation reveals this. The moment you sit and observe, thoughts arise like waves, each one saying, "This is important. Don't let me go." And if you believe them, you're pulled. But if you don't, if you simply watch, the thought fades, dissolves. And with it, the illusion that thinking is always necessary. But this isn't about silencing the mind. It's about recognizing the deeper mechanism at play. The mind is not evil. It's afraid of not being needed, afraid of disappearing into stillness, afraid that if it stops narrating, it will no longer exist. That's why even destructive thoughts persist. Not because they serve you, but because they become part of your self-definition. You've rehearsed them so long that losing them would feel like losing a part of who you are. But that's the illusion. You are not the thought. You are the space it arises in. You are the sky, not the cloud. The witness, not the whisper. And once you see that, the thought's grip loosens. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to banish it. You just need to stop feeding it your identity. Let it come. Let it go. Let it be a visitor, not a resident. And when you do, something miraculous happens. A deeper kind of clarity emerges, one that doesn't come from solving every thought, but from seeing through the need to solve it all. You realize the mind was never your master. It was just afraid to be quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to feel the presence that doesn't think, doesn't fear, and doesn't need to prove itself through endless analysis. That presence is you. And it remains long after the thought is gone. You look in the mirror and see a face. You see your eyes, your hair, your skin features you've seen so many times, they become symbols of you. The mirror feels honest, like a clear reflection of reality. But is it? Or is it lying with every glance? This is the paradox. The mirror shows you what you look like, but hides who you are, and the more you believe what it shows, the further you drift from what it cannot reveal. A mirror reflects surfaces, but you are not a surface. You are movement, memory, emotion, intention. None of that appears in the glass. The sadness behind your smile, the fatigue behind your posture, the stories etched into the way you hold yourself. None of it is visible unless you already know to look. And yet, we trust the mirror. We let it define us. We stare at our reflections, analyzing flaws, questioning beauty, measuring worth, as if truth lived in the angles and shadows of our appearance. But here's the trick. The mirror is not neutral. It shows you a reversed image, a flipped version of yourself that no one else sees. The you in the mirror is not the you others interact with. It's a private fiction, a version you've memorized, edited, judged. And over time, you stop seeing what's there and start seeing what you believe. You see yourself through the lens of your thoughts. I look tired. I'm not attractive. I've aged. These thoughts don't come from the mirror. They come from the mind, but they attach themselves to the image like fog on glass. The mirror becomes a canvas for projection, a place where insecurity is rehearsed and reinforced. But it gets stranger. Even beyond the mirror, your self-image follows you. Every interaction, every photograph, every silence becomes a mirror. You read yourself through the eyes of others, constantly scanning for reflection. Do they see me? Do they approve? Am I enough? In this way, the entire world becomes reflective. Not because it's trying to show you the truth, but because your identity is always looking for itself in the surfaces of experience. But no mirror, physical or psychological, can show you what you truly are, because what you are cannot be seen. It can only be felt, known, lived. It's the warmth in your voice when you're not thinking, the stillness in your body when you feel safe, the presence in your eyes when no one is watching. That's the real you, and yet no glass will ever reveal it. So the question becomes, can you trust what can't be reflected? Can you feel your way into an identity that isn't visual, verbal, or validated by others? It won't be easy. Because mirrors are addictive, they give you something to grasp, but what they offer is always partial, never complete. They show you the costume, not the actor, the ripple, not the river. So next time you look in the mirror, pause. Ask not just what do I see, but what am I missing? Let the reflection be just that, a surface. Not a sentence. Not a sentence on who you are or what you deserve. And as you look, remember, your reflection cannot contain your presence. Your body is not your being. And the image in the mirror may show you your face, but it will never show you your depth. Every night you disappear. Your mind dissolves into dreamscapes in darkness. Your thoughts scatter. Your name fades. And for hours you are nowhere to be found. But then, morning. You open your eyes, the world snaps back into place. Your memories return. You remember your name, your tasks, your worries. You feel like you. But here's the paradox. The you who wakes up is not the same as the one who fell asleep. Identity is not a constant. It's a reconstruction, and every morning you return as a stranger wearing yesterday's name. Neurologically, sleep is a state of consciousness where the self disappears. The default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-reference, and narrative identity goes quiet. In dreams, your body is often missing. Logic collapses, and you can be anyone or no one. The ego goes offline. So what, then, is waking up? It's a reboot, a process of reassembling the illusion of continuity. Your brain rebuilds your identity from memory fragments, emotional residues, and mental habits. It's efficient, seamless. You don't notice it happening. But that's precisely why it's so strange. The you trust so deeply each day is not a stable entity. It's a story your brain rushes to reconstruct before you even finish your first breath. And here's the mystery. How do you know? You're the same person who went to sleep. You rely on memory, but memory is flawed. You rely on feelings, but feelings shift. You rely on consistency, but consistency is rehearsed, not inherent. You could wake up with a different mood, a new thought, a lost belief, and the chain of you would still feel unbroken, even though something fundamental has changed. And yet, despite this quiet transformation, you cling to the illusion of sameness. You say, I am me, without ever asking what me really is. But if you slow down, you might notice something unfamiliar in the mirror. A subtle distance. A sense of looking at yourself from the outside, as if the self hasn't fully landed yet. That's not dissociation. It's honesty. It's a crack in the mask, revealing the shifting nature beneath. This is why some people wake from dreams feeling haunted or changed or lost. Not because of what they dreamed, but because in those hours their usual self dissolved. And the one that returns is not quite the same. Even trauma can fracture the self like this. You go to sleep one person, you wake up with a new defense, a new fear, a new silence, and from that point on, you include something it didn't before. So what does this mean? It means identity is less like a statue and more like a vapor. It gathers, disperses, reassembles, but it's never fixed, never final. And perhaps that's not a problem. Perhaps it's a gift. Because if the self is reconstructed every day, you are free to reconstruct it consciously, to let go of pieces that no longer serve, to add depth, to edit the story. You are not trapped in who you were. You are new each morning, whether you realize it or not. So tomorrow when you wake up, pause, before the thoughts rush in, before the name returns, before the habits take over. Sit in the quiet. Notice the strangeness. Say hello to the being that's here now before memory claims it. You may not recognize it fully, but that presence is real. That stranger is you. Or maybe it's what you've always been. We often think of silence as the absence of something, a gap, a void, an emptiness between sounds or thoughts. But what if that's not true? What if silence isn't the space between thoughts, but the source of them? This is the paradox. Your thoughts arise from silence, are shaped by silence, and dissolve back into silence, and yet you rarely notice the silence at all. Thought is noisy. It narrates, analyzes, plans, judges, remembers. It demands attention. It fills every moment. With sound, even if it's only inside your head. But every thought has a beginning. And if you look closely, you'll see that it emerges from something quieter than itself. Before the thought appears, there's stillness. After it passes, that stillness returns. And the more you become aware of that silence, the more you begin to see that the silence isn't just what surrounds the mind. It's what holds it. Like the sky holds clouds, like a canvas holds paint. The silence is not empty. It's full of potential, of possibility, of presence. And without it, thought cannot exist. Sound needs silence to be heard. Just as meaning needs space to unfold. Yet we fear silence. We avoid it. We fill it with distraction, conversation, stimulation. Because silence reveals things we'd rather not face. The uncertainty, the loneliness, the parts of ourselves we've avoided. But those things aren't created by silence, they're simply revealed in it. And if you stay long enough, if you listen deeply enough, the fear begins to shift. The silence softens, and then you feel it. The presence beneath the noise. The part of you that doesn't speak, doesn't argue, doesn't need to be understood. It just is, meditation teaches this. Not by giving you more thoughts, but by stripping them away, one layer at a time, until all that's left is the awareness that was there before thinking ever began. And in that awareness, you find something strange. You can still perceive, still feel, still exist without thought at all. Not because thought is bad, but because it was never the source of you. It was an expression, a ripple on the surface. And silence is the ocean beneath. This changes everything. You stop believing every thought just because it's loud. You stop needing to speak just because there's space. You begin to choose your words more carefully, not as reactions, but as offerings. Because now you know the weight of silence. You know that it gives thought its shape, just as pauses give rhythm to music. Without silence, everything collapses into noise. Without silence, there is no awareness. So, the next time your mind races, don't try to fight the thoughts. Just return to the silence between them. It's always there, waiting, watching, holding. And if you stay there, if only for a moment, you may realize something profound. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is the presence beneath it. It is not what's missing. It's what you've been missing, and perhaps what you've been looking for all along. You trust your mind. You use it to reason, to judge, to remember, to plan. It narrates your life, explains your past, predicts your future. But what if the very thing you trust the most is lying to you? Not maliciously, not with intent, but constantly, automatically, invisibly. This is the paradox. The human mind is capable of astonishing intelligence, and yet it deceives itself every day in order to protect the fragile illusion of control, identity, and truth. Cognitive science is clear. The mind is not a truth-seeking device. It is a survival machine. It bends facts to match beliefs. It reshapes memories to avoid shame. It constructs explanations for behaviors you didn't consciously choose. Just to maintain coherence, you say, I know why I did that. But often you don't. You say, I remember it clearly, but your memory is edited every time you recall it. You say that can't be true, simply because it doesn't fit your mental framework. These are not flaws. They are functions. They keep the psyche intact. They preserve the self-narrative. They protect the ego. And the ego, above all else, fears annihilation, so the mind lies to others, yes. But more dangerously, to itself. You convince yourself you're over something when you're not. You pretend you're happy when you're breaking. You tell yourself you're fine just to avoid the discomfort of not being fine. And over time, these distortions layer upon each other until it becomes hard to tell what's real and what's rehearsal. The most dangerous lies are not the ones you tell others. They're the ones you believe without questioning. I'm not good enough. People always leave. If I let go, everything will fall apart. These are not truths. These are internal scripts crafted long ago, reinforced over time, and now accepted as reality. But here's the deeper twist. Even when you become aware of the lie, the mind resists letting it go. Why? Because lies provide structure. They make the world feel predictable. They keep identity consistent. And the truth is messy, uncertain, humbling. The truth doesn't protect the ego, it challenges it. So the mind will often fight against the very awareness that could set it free. But that's where awakening begins. Not in achieving clarity, but in admitting how often you're confused. Not in becoming perfect, but in recognizing the parts of you that hide behind performance. Freedom begins when you say, I don't know if this is true. I only know it feels familiar. It begins when you hold your thoughts lightly, when you see belief not as fact, but as lens, when you stop defending your illusions and start observing them. Because the mind can lie to itself, but awareness cannot. Awareness doesn't need a story. It doesn't need to be right. It simply notices, it watches, and in that watching, the lies begin to unravel, not with force, but with light. You don't have to destroy the mind to free yourself. You only have to stop mistaking it for truth. The mind is a brilliant fiction writer. Let it write. Just don't forget you are the one reading. You've made it to the edge of the labyrinth. But here's the truth that waits at the end. There is no exit. Only reflection. Each paradox you've walked through, each loop, each twist, each strange mirror wasn't showing you the world. It was showing you yourself. And not just oneself, but the many yous that flicker in and out of focus with every breath. You thought memory was truth, but it invents the past. You thought thoughts were yours, but they arrive uninvited. You thought emotions told the truth, but they are tinted by stories you never chose. You thought you were choosing, until you saw the decision had already been made. You thought you were the thinker, then realized you were the watcher. Your desire was a loop. Your attention was a puppet. Your voice was an echo. Your identity, fluid, responsive, uncertain, was a role you rehearsed so. Well, you forgot it was never yours to begin with, and yet, beneath all of it, something remained. A silence that shaped your thoughts. A body that remembered more than your mind ever could. A stranger you woke up as over and over only to call it you. A mirror that hid more than it showed, because it could never reflect the part of you that lives outside language. Outside logic. Outside time. And just when you thought you reached the final thread, you found the mind itself lying to you to protect the very identity it had built from scraps. So, what does this all mean? It means you're not a fixed being trapped inside a story. You are a shifting field of awareness, sculpted by paradox, shaped by contradiction, and held together. Not by certainty, but by inquiry. You are the memory that changes when touched. The thought that fears silence, the self that watches the self dissolve. You are the question that can never be answered, because you are the one asking it. And maybe that's the real secret. Not to find a final truth, but to learn how to live inside the question. To bow to the unknown. To watch the mind with soft eyes. To whisper when the next illusion comes, I see you. I don't believe you. But I understand why you're here. Because in the end, the forbidden knowledge was never hidden. It was simply uncomfortable. Too close. Too raw. Too honest. And now that you've seen it, you may never unsee it. You are not awake. You are awakening. Not a destination, but a spiral that keeps bringing you back to the same truth in deeper ways. The mind will forget this tomorrow. It will distract you, deceive you, perform for you, but somewhere underneath it all, you'll remember there's a mirror that doesn't reflect your face. It reflects your presence. And that mirror has been watching you this entire time.